Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Big thanks for Linda for organizing this, for envisioning this, and for bringing Sharon and myself in. In fact, she literally just brought Sharon in.
Hello. I think I'm now in. Yes?
Hi, Sharon. Everybody's listening to you now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Sharon Press from Mitchell-Hamline School of Law. Sharon, you want to give us your online creds?
So thanks, Noam, and I am delighted to now finally be with you all. I am the director of the Dispute Resolution Institute at Mitchell-Hamline, and we have a pretty robust online dispute resolution program. In fact, a pretty robust online law school program. And so I've been teaching along with colleagues here skills courses online for several years now, so including mediation, negotiation, theories of conflict, arbitration, etc. And really delighted to be joining with Noam, who preceded us all in developing these expertise.
Well, thank you, Sharon. My name is Noam Ebner. I'm a professor at Creighton University's Graduate School. In the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies, we offer a master's degree in negotiation and conflict resolution. I used to be the chair of our online graduate degree in negotiation and conflict resolution. This was a program that was conducted 90% online. In that capacity, I was responsible for helping Creighton to set up their online program, to design the courses, to support the teachers as they transition to online teaching, figuring out online pedagogy for negotiation and conflict resolution. And I, together with my colleagues, were able to build up quite an amazing, wholly online program at Creighton. I've been teaching and designing courses online for about 15 years now, all told. And I hope to put some of what I've learned along the way at your disposal, as many of you are making this very abrupt, very sudden transition to online teaching. Sharon, would you like to kick us off?
Great. So let's go to the next slide, and we wanted to just talk a little bit about our intent in putting this webinar together. And as Noam said, on really short notice, so I appreciate those of you making time on this incredibly short notice. So what we wanted to do was to cover the basics for how to conduct simulations and role plays in a course that formerly was in person and is now online, these so-called transition courses. So we wanted to be clear, it's not a webinar on distance learning or even on all aspects of moving your course from in-person to synchronous online. The focus here is really just going to be on the nuts and bolts of running simulations. And while we were putting this together, we continually had to remind ourselves to keep the focus narrow on just that, because there's tons that can be said on all of those other aspects. So the primary audience that we had in our mind were educators in conflict resolution courses, but we believe that this advice is easily adaptable to other contexts in which simulations and role plays are used. And we really appreciate that Linda and the ABA section of dispute resolution has been generous in making this available free of charge to everyone and recording it and then allowing us to share the link. The dispute resolution legal educators have always been known for their spirit of sharing, and I'm really honored to be a part of this wonderful group. So you see we have both the goal up there and our ungoal of the things we are not going to be doing, explaining the fundamentals of transitioning or even how to teach using Zoom beyond the simulations. I know that there are some other seminars coming up, and I expect we will continue to have lots of opportunities to try out and expand into additional areas.
And as we focus on simulation, here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk you through, you've all conducted lots of simulations in your lives, in your classroom, and 80% of what you're going to do here is the same. Online teaching is first and foremost teaching. We're just going to walk you through some of the steps you need to take and the technical thingies you need to move as you go through the process of simulating outside. We've broken the process down into 4 elements or 4 phases or stages. It's the setup, the conduct of simulation, the observation of student activity in the simulation, and the debrief session. We're going to be demonstrating this or discussing this specifically using Zoom. In other words, we will show specific screenshots or specific pictures of how you do this stuff on Zoom. The reason to choose Zoom is simply because that's what, I don't want to throw out a make-believe number, so I'll say 87% of universities have transitioned to using Zoom. You can do this on other video conferencing platforms, and this will be helpful to you if you do use these other platforms. Zoom is particularly conducive to simulations because it allows to break participants out into breakout rooms, much as we do in our classrooms. Whether we tell them to grab a corner or whether we actually have other classrooms for them to work in, you can do that same thing in Zoom. Some other video conferencing platforms allow for that. Adobe does, Blue Jeans, Samba, different ones do, and some don't. So that's something you're going to have to find out for yourself. If your video conferencing platform doesn't seem to support the things we're talking about now, one thing you can do is just to download Zoom, sign up for a pro program. It'll cost you about $15 a month, and to use it yourself. I'm not. I don't get commissions from Zoom, and I hope you get those $15 back. But in times of crisis, we might find laying that out to be the right thing to do.
So, Noam, this is Linda. One of the questions is that they don't, one of the attendees doesn't use Zoom, but uses something called Collaborate Ultra. He teaches at George Mason, although he does use Zoom in his practice.
So I would say I don't know Collaborate Ultra. What I would suggest is if you can't find a breakout room, or put it this way, if by the end of this session you consider that a platform with breakout rooms is the best way to work, then either ask your IT if there is a breakout function in it, and if not, you might consider giving certain classes over Zoom.
Mr. Perlmutter indicates that there are in fact breakout rooms. So.
Oh, okay, that's great news. Okay, great. And over the past couple of years, many of the older platforms have incorporated this. So it's worth poking around behind the scenes, and it's worth asking your IT department about. So what we're going to focus on is challenges to the transition classroom. We're not going to be talking about, as Sharon said, best practices in conducting simulations in general. We're looking specifically at those transition classrooms where people have taken their 3-hour or 2-hour courses online, and they want to do simulation snack in the middle of those after an introduction and before a debrief. Later, we're going to explain briefly why we think that these transition classrooms might not hold water for long. When you look at the arc of where this state of crisis that the world and higher education are in now, the classrooms in the way we're transitioning to teach them, it might not be a stable possibility over time. And given that, this might be the time, once we've mastered using Zoom or other platforms for conducting classroom simulations, this might be a good idea to start experimenting with asynchronous ideas. So we will give some ideas for that. That's in the last part of this. After that, we will give as much Q&A time as you could possibly need. I've cleared the afternoon. So 2 things to keep in mind before we get started. The first one is before you consider doing something new, particularly online, so you're conducting simulations online, it's worth having a talk with your disability services or with your IT accessibility staff to find out if they've had any issues or if they have any recommendations for making this class or this portion of the class or this teaching tool in general more welcoming, more accessible to people with with different types of disabilities. They've seen a lot of things in their collective experience. It's worth having a talk. It's also worth, you can also ask students if anybody has any particular difficulty. They can also reach out to you. But it's also good on the institutional side. Sometimes students don't want to speak up. It's also good to check in on the institutional side. And the second thing in this regard is we're going to speak about teaching practices. Let's call them possible teaching practices. We don't represent the ABA. The ABA is hosting this, but we certainly don't represent the ABA. The ABA, the Council on Legal Education, has its own guidelines for running simulations or simulation courses. Nobody anticipated what is happening now. There are no specific guidelines as to what to do in this situation. So every school is kind of trying to figure it out on its own, and I'm sure being in contact with the ABA and asking for variances or for permission to do it this way. If you feel the need to do that, if you're in a law school and feel the need to do that, go ahead and contact your ABA contact person. And if not, or they don't have an answer, and I think it would be reasonable for them not to have an answer yet, then I guess the answer is, just go ahead and do the best educational plan that you can with regard to simulations, and hope that they will be convinced after the fact. We hope to share with you good practices for that. That's as far as I'll say on that point. Sharon, do you want to say anything else on that point?
Yeah, I would just add that I think it's important for, don't go and be contacting people at the ABA. Everybody's overwhelmed. So, work through your deans, associate deans, vice deans, however you're academically organized, because my understanding is that the ABA has been in contact with that group and has been suggesting how to proceed with all of this. So first step should definitely be just within your school for guidance, and then have them reach out if there's further guidance needed. Okay, so let's move on to just a little bit about terminology, and just so that we're all talking on the same with the same understandings of things. And so, Noam, if you want to advance the slides.
I do. I just want to ask if people can see the slides. Can the audience weigh in? You can type in the chat.
And are people able to see it?
Yes. Hi, John. Thank you. Hi, David. Thanks. Oh, I want to say hi to everyone in here. I won't. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, you're seeing more stuff than I am, Noam.
Oh,
so.
yeah. There's lots of people they can see, so you're good.
Okay. So terminology. LMS is something that you will often hear tossed around. It basically just means learning management system. We use variety of different systems. Many law schools used to only use Twin. Now many are using Blackboard or Canvas. Moodle is another version of it. They're all learning management systems. And what you would need to just find out is what's your learning management system and then how you can access it. So sometime in the later slides, we'll be referencing that you have options of how to use your learning management system. So that's what LMS is. And then again, just for clarity's sake, I'm sure most of you already know this, that there are two different primary modes that we can be teaching in. Synchronous, which is all of what we do when we are in person. So those are in-person classes where teaching and learning takes place at the same time. They're scheduled and people show up all at the same time and you're all together learning and teaching. Asynchronous is the learning that students engage in on their own schedule. So in asynchronous teaching, you typically will prepare in advance the lessons and maybe recorded lectures and PowerPoints along with a variety of different ways for students to engage with each other and to engage with you, and possibly doing simulations where they themselves are coordinating to create their own time to meet for their simulations. We're going to talk more about this at the end, but when we say, asynchronous simulations, there are truly asynchronous simulations where, for example, you conduct a simulation via email. People are not gathered at the same time. They just are, as they get to it, as they have the time, they would respond back and forth. Much of the asynchronous kinds of simulations, though, involve smaller groups of people gathering together, figuring out the time that they will meet. And I will say in a negotiation class, it provides the ability for people to have a smaller negotiation in preparation for their bigger negotiation. In other words, negotiating about the time, the medium they'll use, those kinds of things provide students with additional opportunities to negotiate, and often those negotiations are more real than the quote simulations that they're doing with role play parts. But again, just basically asynchronous is when people are not all gathering at the same time and place, and learning and teaching goes on together.
Okay, let's jump into it now. And before we jump into it, I just need to apologize for one simple thing. I wish that instead of showing you a PowerPoint, I could just share my own screen, showing my own Zoom controls and poking around from one place to another, and Sharon and I that way would show you how to do everything we talk about. Unfortunately, one of Zoom's limitation is that you can't screencast Zoom. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone, but it means that we can't basically show you what we're doing as we do it. So instead we're going to use some screenshots to punctuate specific issues. We apologize that this had to turn into a PowerPoint type thingy. So let's jump in. So preliminary, before you get started, okay? As soon as you open Zoom, the first thing that you need to do is you need to check your settings. And there are a great many settings, and I don't know what they're set to. Some of them are set to defaults, and some of them are set to institutional defaults, by which I mean the admins at your university have set them one way or another. You want to take a look at all of these. Some of them you won't understand, don't touch them. Some of them you will understand, and you'll tweak them to suit your preferences. And the one that we want to make sure that you definitely check and adjust if necessary, it appears under In Meeting, Advanced. And that's the control that controls whether you can use breakout rooms in the middle of a session. If you don't have this on, then you won't have a breakout room button available to you in class. And that will be very, very embarrassing if you just said, now I'm going to break you out into breakout rooms. So check that ahead of time. And if it doesn't work, you want to talk with your IT folks. Now, a lot of the settings in Zoom, what you actually can or can't do, depend. Sometimes they depend on your version of Zoom that you're using. Sometimes it depends on your plan, whether you're a basic plan or a pro plan or an institutional plan. Zoom has begun kind of upgrading certain aspects of everybody's plans in order to help everybody out now. So it's really hard to know what exactly might or might not be included and what might be on or off. So take a look at that. And if you can't find the things you need, speak to your admins. I prefer you get acquainted with this yourself because your IT folks are going to be just swamped, beleaguered for the foreseeable future. So it's best to be independent.
In terms of setup, the first thing that you need to do is exactly what you would do with your in-person class. You're going to assign roles. You're going to put people into groups. You're going to figure out who's going to be playing which part of the simulation. The only and major difference when you are doing this in this transition classroom that we're talking about is that you're going to need to prepare it and share it in advance. So some of you may be used to working all of that out in advance and then walking into the classroom and writing up on the whiteboard, here's what the groups are going to be, and here are who's going to be playing which parts of it, and then handing out materials right then and there. The problem is that you are not physically all together, and while it is possible to do that kind of handing out of materials, it's infinitely easier and less cumbersome to hand them out in advance, if you were, or to send them in advance. So what we suggest is that that same activity you do of creating that chart where you assign simulation roles and simulation groups, that you would post that to your course LMS and or send it out via email so everybody knows in advance what they're going to be doing. And along with that, you are going to be providing the students with that role information in advance, along with whatever instructions that you want them to utilize to prepare. So if you want them to prepare a mediation statement in advance, if you want them to have worked out a proposal in advance, if they have exhibits that you want them to put together, anything that you want them to do. If they are in teams, for example, either a pair of negotiating partners or an attorney-client, and you want them to meet in advance, or co-mediators, that should all be explained via this initial email when you're sending things out. Again, you can do this individual, one by one, or you can do, create for yourself a list of everyone who is playing part A, and then send the message with the attachments to everybody part A or everybody in part B. It also may be possible in your LMS, your learning management system, to create a group area where it is only accessible to the students in a particular group that you create. So you have some options there, but the point is you're going to want to get this out to them in advance. You will want to also explain if there is preliminary work that you are asking them to do and it requires submission, that you are clear about how they are to get that submission to you. Are they emailing it to you? Is it via the LMS site? I think for many of us, we find the use of the LMS site to be better, because you're less likely to miss something that comes in your email. If you're like me, emails have become just completely overwhelming over the last week or so, and it's very easy for things to get lost amongst the many different things that you have going on in your email boxes.
Finally, the last thing to do in instructing students ahead of time, they might want to bring their roles printed out, or they might want to bring them open on another device so that when they're interacting by video, they're not constantly switching windows to see, oh wait, how much money am I supposed to pay? The next thing is when you arrive to class, you want to be the first person in the class. You want to open up the class 15, before the simulation begins. You want to be in there with plenty of time. So if you're opening up class with a simulation, so enter before class and set this up. If you're doing a simulation in the middle of class, then give students a break and leave yourself enough time to set up your breakout rooms. You want to set up your breakout rooms ahead of time so you can give students a break, and then you sit down and with Zoom open, and it's open because you're teaching your class in Zoom. You click on breakout rooms, which is circled in blue. Zoom will ask you if you want it to automatically break participants down into rooms. And you don't want to do this because you've gone ahead and set up simulation groups or simulation pairs. You don't want the Zoom to randomly throw people into separate breakout rooms. So you click manually, and then you click create rooms. And and you just tell it the number of rooms you want it to create. If you get that wrong, don't worry, because you can always delete or add rooms later on. So you create a room, you create the rooms, and you go in. And in this, you see in this slide, I've created 3 breakout rooms, and now I want to assign students to it. So I click on Assign, which is highlighted in yellow, and what Zoom will do is it will show you a list of student names because the students are all in the classroom, and it'll show you a list of student names, and you choose the 2 or 3 or 4 students that you want to assign to that breakout room. Again, I can't show you what that looks like because that is one of the things that I'm unable to snap a picture of. I can't take a picture of Zoom. It just ignores that that field.
Noam, can I make one other just
sure.
to people? Lots of this stuff you can practice in advance, but for this particular feature, you're going to have to enlist some colleagues to sign on as silent people for you to manipulate into rooms, because you actually have to have enough people signed on to have people to assign to groups. So Zoom is smart enough to know that you don't have, that there's nobody for you to break out into groups because it's only you. The trick is, and you'll see that there are ways to create this to practice with.
Right, and let's just keep reiterating that. Practice, practice, practice. Practice this before you walk into a room. I know many of you are starting to teach this week, and many of you are starting to use this next week. There's a weekend set up and just practice these basic mechanical elements. Practice them over the weekend. If like me, as opposed to Sharon, you don't have friends who can do that, but you are blessed with multiple devices, what you can do is you can send yourself a Zoom invitation to your email, and then open your email from 3 different devices or 4 different devices, which is what I did on these screenshots. And then you have 4 open instances of Zoom, and you can practice moving people into rooms, out of rooms, and then yourself as teacher traveling to rooms. We'll see how that works in just a second. So once you've assigned students to a room, you can go ahead and rename that room. So you can give it a room just because you want to remember who it is. You can call it Negotiation Group 1, or you could call it David, Mary, and Karen.
Can I just add that there was a question about how the names get put in there, and so the answer is when the students sign in, their names will appear as people that you could assign.
Right. So the important thing is that you need to do this after students have signed into class. Okay, and before the simulation starts. So that either means that you use the first few minutes of class time for this, or you use the last few minutes before the simulation is supposed to begin in order to do this. There is another way, which is far more difficult for some people. It's just trickier, which is to do all this at the time you're creating the Zoom invitation that you can send out for your classroom meeting. I think that many of you will find, this is just a matter of preferences in using Zoom, that you might prefer to simply have a permanent link to a Zoom room, and you open it, if your class is every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., so you open that room every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. and you don't send out a separate invitation to students each and every week to join you in a Zoom class. That's a matter of preference. If you do send out the invitations, there is a way to assign breakup rooms at that point. So
and I will just say, Noam, that there's been on the chat, there's or the Q&A, there's a lot of requests for information on how to do that. And I think many of our colleagues are in have larger classes. I think we were envisioning that most of you were going to be in smaller enrollment classes, maybe 24, 30, and you really wouldn't necessarily need to do it in advance, but it based on the Q&A, you might want to, if you can, just walk through a little bit on how to do that if it's easy.
Since I haven't done that in a while, I don't want to.
Okay.
I will instead find out the answer, and if anybody wants to just drop me an email afterwards, and I promise to write an answer and provide it. But if you have 70 students in a class and you don't want to waste time at the beginning or in the middle of class doing it, but you do have a TA. This, as several other things we'll mention, this is great use for a TA. But I will provide an answer to that question later on. Once you've assigned rooms, you just click on options. When you're on the breakout room tab, you'll see a button there that says options, and you click on options, and that gives you some possibilities. One is it allows you to move all participants into breakout rooms automatically. That means that when you click open all rooms, they will all go to their breakout rooms. If you click the breakout room closes automatically after 30 minutes, then, or you could change the timing on that, then you could say, folks, you have 45 minutes to conduct this simulation, and you enter 45 minutes there, and they will all be back after 45 minutes because they can't stay in the breakout rooms. And finally, another setting you can adjust is that usually what happens is when you close the breakout room to bring them back to the main room, they are given a timer saying the breakout room will shut in 60 seconds as the default, and you can adjust that to be the breakout room will close in 10 seconds so that they come back immediately, or you can change that to 2 minutes if you want them to have time for, okay, last comments, everybody, and then they go around and have last comments. Okay? Finally, right before you start the simulation, and this relates to the question of absentees, you check once again, is anybody missing? And you can both check that on your own screen, and you can also ask students, let me know in the chat if anybody's missing a member of their simulation group. If anybody is looking around the gallery view and seeing that nobody, that their mediator isn't here, let me know. Okay?
Okay, so we're going to move on to conducting the actual simulation, and I'll just make 2 preliminary comments back on things that we have already covered, because I have been monitoring the Q&A. So first of all, John Barkey reminded us, and it's actually in a piece that Noam will talk about shortly, that Zoom does have tutorials, and there's actually a pretty good, and it's pretty short tutorial. It's only a little over 2 minutes about use of breakout rooms, and so that's a good source for getting more information. There also was a really helpful comment about my comment about not having people email you, that you could have everybody put the same, the course name in the subject line, and then create a filter in your emails and have all of those emails go to one place so that it would be less likely you would lose them. So just 2 additional tips. Okay, so actually conducting the simulation. So while everybody is together, you need to inform them of a bunch of things. So first of all, you want to let them know that you're going to be sending them to breakout rooms, and that's how they're going to be conducting their simulations. And that once, if you have set this up in Zoom, when you open those rooms, they are going to receive a prompt that says that a breakout room has been open for them. Do they want to join? And you want to tell them, yes, that they want to select, yes, join. And then they will be taken out of the main room and into the breakout area. They should set their view to gallery because those of you who have been using Zoom know that there are several different kinds of views that you can put your screen in. One of the views is that you get just the person who is speaking or the last person who has spoken. It's much more helpful when you are doing, particularly if there's multi-parties involved, so more than just 2, that folks have, particularly if they're mediating, all of the people up that they can see. So that would be gallery view. You want to tell the students that they should begin that simulation as soon as they are in the room, that nobody is going to come and tell them to begin. They shouldn't wait for you to listen to their start, because as you think about it, depending on how many rooms you've set up, there's no way you're going to make it to every single room to have them begin. You can assign observer roles, and actually, you know, if you figure out that you need to reassign somebody because you have an absentee, or you might just decide, even for purposes of you're going to debrief it, or if you have an odd number of people, that you want to have observers in the group. You want to let the observer know that that is their role. You should decide, just as you would in a regular class, are you going to give those observers the information about both of the roles? Do you want them to have some kind of a sheet that they're going to fill out, or what exactly are they watching for? But what you want them to know is that they need to turn off both their video and mute their microphone upon entry, because you don't want them inadvertently calling attention to themselves. That's actually, it's much easier for them to be in no video mode anyway. That way, if they are so inclined to make a face or something like that, no one can see what it is that they are doing. They should literally, you know, sort of be that fly on the wall. In terms of your role, you might join them. And I know that some of you are nervous about, you know, conducting simulations in an online environment and thinking, you know, oh, but I'm not going to be able to see everybody. And how am I going to know what's going on in those different spaces, those breakout rooms where I am not? And I would say that, you know, in our bricks and mortar classes, our in-person classes, we similarly face that challenge. We're not with everybody all at the same time. Typically, we send people out and they're doing simulations. And if you're like me, I pop in. Nobody knows where I might pop in or when I might pop in. And so I think you can do the same thing in an online environment. In Zoom, you can seek, you know, set it to join any of the breakout rooms. And when you are doing that, and we'll show you that in a moment, just, again, this is all in instructions. You want to just let them know you're going to be doing that. Let them know if you expect them to stop where they are and to sort of catch you up, or do you expect them just to continue going and you're just going to be watching silently from the side, like that fly on the wall? If you are doing the fly on the wall, I would suggest enter without your video on and muted. Pop in, pop out, go to the next one. Again, in how much, when you want to, the things you want to tell them in advance is how much time they have for the simulation, and what happens when they finish early, or if they finish early. Do you want them just to take a break, or do you have something specific that you want them to do? Do you want them to do an individual debrief in their small group? Do you want them writing up an agreement? Same kinds of issues that you face with when you're doing in-person simulations and your groups don't all end at the same time. People do. In Zoom, there is an ability for people to ask for assistance if they need it. So once they're in their breakout room, there is a, they can hit something that says, I need help. And so let them know that that's a possibility. And then the final things that we suggest that you inform them of before you send them out is, if they lose Zoom capabilities, they should re-log into the system, let you know via chat, and then to take it from there. If for some reason it's not just that they are out and they can get back in, but they've lost internet connection, for example. Then you're going to want to let them know to send you an email and in some other manner that you can do, and make sure you're monitoring that. And then our last suggestion is if they lose a teammate. So if somebody doesn't show up for 5 minutes or more in their breakout room, that the other students should let you know that somebody has been lost.
Or if they join but then drop out for some reason and they don't rejoin within a couple of minutes, invite them back. And I just want to comment on that, that you really, you can't drop out while students are simulating. I don't know if anyone here ever, has a little closet that they go and hide in for 10 minutes while students are simulating, and you can use that time to meditate. But while face-to-face classroom simulation might offer you that opportunity, it really doesn't here. You need to stay on top of things. Remember how new this is to students. They are just as used to you as to the traditional classroom. This is just as new to them. And you need to be aware of, you'll see request for help prompts coming in, and you can click on them and go to their room. And you need to keep your email open and be aware, if a student has dropped out and is trying to reach you. Sharon has brought us up to the point that we're ready to conduct the simulation. You've informed them of everything we need to inform them of. And now what we do is we say, okay guys, 3, 2, 1, and you click open all rooms, which I've highlighted in yellow down there. It will take them all to their breakout rooms. You will, in the meanwhile, you'll see everybody disappearing to their breakout rooms. They have to click accept or join, and then they disappear from the main room and they appear in their breakout rooms. You, on the breakout room button, you have this kind of control panel. You will see the breakout rooms. You will see the green means that students are in that breakout room. If a student is still in the main room, that'll be clear. But you'll see that everybody's in the breakout room. And you can, sit there and wait for a while and then start to join these rooms by clicking on the blue join that you'll see there on the right end. And that brings you to that particular breakout room. And at the end of if you have a message you want to broadcast to all participants, such as, okay, everybody, 10 minutes left, make it count, or I just realized that John owes Mindy, $30, not $30 million, and there's a mistake, there's a typo in the instructions, then that's the kind of thing you can click, broadcast a message to all, and it will send a message to all participants. When you are done with the simulation, you click close all rooms, and then after 30 or 60 or 2 seconds or more, depending on what you've set, students will all reappear in the main room. But before we end the simulation, we want to talk about one issue that I saw in the Q&A, and I know it's on many people's mind, which is the question of caucusing. Some mediation models include caucusing private meetings with parties one at a time, between parties and the mediator. In our classrooms, we can do that by asking one of the parties to leave the room and wait in the hall or go sit down the hall in a lounge. How do we do that online? So here's the challenge. The challenge is that if you're running your class in Zoom and your class is the main room and the caucus room, and the breakout rooms are the simulation rooms, you can't create breakout rooms from these breakout rooms. I hope this is clear. I would not be surprised if it weren't. But the main point being is that when students are in breakout rooms mediating, they can't create their own breakout rooms to use as caucusing rooms. So you have to find workarounds in order to do this. Well, one option, of course, is how about practicing once or more mediation without caucusing? Some of you will celebrate this opportunity And I wish there was video on this. I wish I could see all your faces, because half of your faces just lit up and the other half crumpled. But you can certainly try it once and then compare it to the previous simulations you've done in the semester in which you've worked with caucusing and perhaps even primarily with caucusing. So that's one opportunity. Another opportunity is to say, well, actually Zoom is a great, it's a great platform for mediation. So what we're going to do is now, okay, it's 2 o'clock. Everybody's going to shut down Zoom, and the mediator in each group is going to send a Zoom invitation from their own Zoom account to the students in their group. And then they will conduct mediation in Zoom with the shared mediation room as the main room, and they can create caucus rooms by using their breakout rooms. I hope you've been able to follow this. Now, this is a very tricky thing, because the moment you let everybody out of the main room, they can get lost, equipment can freeze up, things can go wrong. But if you have students who are responsible students, perhaps smaller groups, and see they are experienced with Zoom, you might choose to do this. And you tell them, look, at 3 o'clock, everybody has shut down their own Zoom instance, and you log back onto the main class Zoom by using the same link you originally logged into class with. I hope that's clear. If not, I bet you can put some questions in the Q&A, and we can explain that one afterwards. I'll tell you that the downright best way I've used this when I have wanted to use caucusing is just using the honor system. I tell students, look, if you're in a caucus, just shut down your video, shut down your audio, and that's it. And I believe in, close your computer screen, or don't do that, because some students' computers shut down when they shut their computer screens. So just shut down your audio, shut down your video, and come back in 5 minutes or in 10 minutes, or come back when the mediator sends you a text. So to this, they need coordination ahead of time. Another way to do this, not dissimilar, is to conduct the caucuses through another method. In other words, they're still staying, everybody's still in the main room, but one party shuts down their video and the mediator calls the other party on the phone. They have a phone caucus, they end the phone caucus, the mediator calls the other party, they have a phone caucus, they resume the mediation in their breakout room. I'll notice that we've been discussing negotiation and mediation. Of course, there are other conflict processes that we could discuss, and also I'm sure there might be faculty here from other fields who are not teaching necessarily conflict processes, but may have seen the notice and have come in because you use simulations in your courses in business and medicine and nursing, in whatever, in law perhaps, and you use simulations for student interaction or client counseling or for whatever it is that you do. You need to work through everything we've said so far and ask, is there any aspect of my own classroom simulations that doesn't fit smoothly with that, and what are my workarounds? So for example, if I were conducting arbitration simulations, I would consider, I used to run arbitration simulations that had actual physical evidence. Well, one was a broken pipe. Another was pictures of a broken chair. And whatever it is, in those cases, you would want to make sure that the evidence you were going to use and have students bring to class would be in e-form. So that's just as an example. Think about your own processes and what tweaks you need to make.
Okay, so we are up to observations. I'm sorry, I got distracted on the chats. There's been lots of wonderful discussion on the chats, and in fact, many.
You go. I got this.
We're suggesting the different ways that of running the caucuses, and as you were preceding Noam's explanation of them in real time. So
but we all want to know everything all at once.
That's right. So obviously we all are at different points in our knowledge and expertise in doing these kinds of things. So some of this I have already explained a bit about, but I'm going to speak about it more intentionally in the section now, which we, as you recall, we broke this up into the setup of the simulation, the conducting of the simulation, and now you're into the part where you are actually observing it. Again, when you are in Zoom, you can it's really complicated. You can click join when you want to join a particular group, and you can click leave when you want to leave that group and join another one. So that is the mechanical way that you literally flip back and forth between the different groups. Again, what you do when you join the groups is up to you, and we're not making any comments about, really what's the best thing to do, but you should just treat it as you would in your regular simulations that you do when you're in person with folks. What do you do when you are jumping in, popping in, and observing? If you're using a platform that doesn't allow for the creation of these breakout groups, and then again, you can appoint observers in each room. So if you are sending them away, as we suggested that you could do, you might, again, send them away because you want them also to have the functionality of being able to caucus themselves. So you could appoint observers in each room, and again, with instructions, helping them to understand and giving them more clarity around what their role is. You also could try to do something, simulation that is in front of the entire class. And again, in a bricks and mortar class, you would bring people up to the front and you would have people start the simulation as a fishbowl. You could then, when you're in class together, you could substitute people in and out. You could also do that remotely. So you could start with some people in the role of mediator and in the role of party, and then sub out a different mediator at a spot. Stop the simulation, talk about what's happened, get some ideas of what might happen next. We are going to get to this in the debrief, but I'll say it here. If you're doing fishbowl, again, everything, you just need to be way more direct and intentional about what you're doing. So, if you're used to looking around the room and seeing who looks like they might want to pop in, you might not be able to do that. So you likely are going to have to be more directive in selecting, okay, so-and-so, I'd like for you to come up and to be the mediator now. Another option is you could purchase a Zoom account for a month. It's, again, Noam and I get no kickbacks or royalties from Zoom, but we have both been using it for a while and found it to be just a really easy to use. And amazingly, since so many schools have gone to using it, I was expecting that there was going to be some glitches maybe or problems with the functionality, but so far so good. It seems to be working.
I would say to that, wait till next week with your fingers tightly crossed when it really starts kicking in across a lot of institutions. And hope for the best. And finally, I'll say that since Zoom is also really, it's really the simplest to use of all the platforms that I've used, and I've used a lot. That's why I'm able to get the words out of my mouth, buy yourself a subscription, even though I strongly believe that teachers should not need to subsidize their institutions' handling of this crisis. That is a gross understatement of how I feel, but still. Okay, let's move quickly through debrief. And when I say move quickly, particularly because I want to only discuss the elements of debrief that are different. You know how to conduct debrief sessions. So in a debrief session, one question is how do you collect the quick, just to know the results of the negotiation. So you could do it just by, going around the main classroom once everybody's back there and saying, okay, could you tell me, your outcomes, but you could also use technology a little more helpfully as long as you're online. You can have, and some of you do this in your traditional classrooms as well, and if not, you should ask Alice and Carol how to do it. Some of you, you can ask students to quickly type up their outcomes in a paragraph and stick it in upload it to a Google form or into a Google Doc that with a link you give them in advance. You can ask them to email it to you as soon as they're done, or as I said, you can share it orally once you reconvene. My suggestion is, as long as you're online, as long as they're online, why not use this as an opportunity to kind of cut out the time needed to present all of these could be quite a lot of time, whereas just asking everybody to put up on a Google Doc and saying, okay, let's start off with taking 3 minutes for everybody to peruse the Google Doc and get a load of all of the outcomes. Another way to do it is as you can go around the room and ask people for the outcome of their group one by one, and as you do, you can write that down. You can write down the results on a whiteboard that Zoom has, just as you might note it down on the whiteboard in your class. And basically, you can use all of the other best practices that you always use in your classroom in the online environment, which includes, developing your teaching points ahead of time, preparing questions. If you use PowerPoint slides for key takeaways, I don't. Some people do. Here it flows very, very naturally. Students are already staring at the screen. Bring all of those practices online. It's very simple. The most challenging part of the debrief that people have been asking me about the most over these past couple of weeks, though, is not so much how you get the information, but how you conduct that interactive session that we're so used to doing in our classrooms. So Sharon, you want to take this?
So first of all, some technical kinds of things. For you want to set things up again so that you are seeing everybody. The gallery view, some people asked about that. It's typically up in the right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. You can set what your view is, and you can play with that. You also want to, you'll note at the bottom of your Zoom screen that you have your controls, and that includes participants, which you can click on and see all of the participant names, whether they are muted or not muted. It is also where you can see if they have raised their hands. So you want to keep that panel open so that you are able to see that, and also keep the chat open. You can tell that sometimes you can get distracted when you are monitoring all of those different kinds of things. So it is both important to monitor it, particularly if you tell people, I am going, raise your hand if you want to join in the conversation. Then you have to notice if people are raising their hands. Or do you want them to type something in? If you are lucky enough to have a teaching assistant assigned to your class, that's a great role for your teaching assistant to play for you. So that they can be monitoring those other things. And so, when Noam is talking, that's what I've been trying to do, is to monitor the Q&A and chat, and vice versa. So that's possible. Someone did ask earlier in the chat, and just to be clear, yes, you do have more buttons and functions when you are the host than when you are not the host. So there are things that you won't see until you actually set up a Zoom meeting yourself. And again, back to that suggestion, practice, practice, practice. Try them out. It's actually quite easy once you do it, but you have to actually be the one doing it in order to see all of those kinds of things. Alt-A enables you to have those controls visible at all times. So In a classroom, you typically have the added advantage of looking around the room and reading body language, looking around the room and being able to give an indication to someone, yep, you're next, without verbally saying something, pointing to encourage someone to jump into the conversation. Goes without saying that those kinds of things need to be much more explicit and direct. And so if you want to call on someone, you need to actually say, Noam, I'd like for you to answer this question, not just look their way. They don't know where you're looking for that. And then think a little bit, and you might want to just play around with, do you want people to jump in when they have something to say? Or do you want to wait for people to be called on? Again, in a classroom setting, talking over each other isn't quite as problematic as it is when you're online. So it likely you will find that it's best to be a little bit more controlling on how that discussion unfolds. Recognize that this does provide a little bit of a downside than you are used to in your regular interactive discussions that you would have in person. There are other things that one can do online that actually are in some ways better than what we are used to in the classroom, which we will get to in a little bit. But I will point out that as one of the things that I learned when I started teaching online, as an extrovert, I learned how much our traditional way of teaching preferences extroverts. That people who think quickly and want to think out loud and are comfortable just raising their hand and starting to talk, that's what we preference in a classroom interactive discussion. Now, some of us may be better at lessening that, but that is traditionally what happens. When you're online, you actually can surface, and what I learned was all of these wonderful introverts that I had in my class that had amazing things to say, but weren't going to be the people who raised their hands, and therefore were keeping it to themselves. So consider, what are those pros and cons? There are things we're going to gain. There's things that we are going to just need to be doing differently. And remind everybody to use mute when they are not speaking, because when they sneeze, the camera will go to them and everything will be focused on them. So also when people are typing notes or whatnot, you can hear it when their microphone is on. So everyone should go to mute.
Let me just add on, Sharon, that one thing I found helpful in conducting synchronous sessions on Zoom is that on the one hand, if you don't want everybody jumping in, particularly as the group gets larger, and you do go to a mode in which you're calling on people, you want it to be, to explain to them that you're doing this not because you're seeking to cold call anybody, but and put anybody on the spot, but rather because you want to hear from everybody, and this is the best way to do it in this classroom, and that's how we're going to do it. And the way to let them off that hook of being on the spot is by giving them some time to think before you actually call on them. So I might say, so in a minute I'm going to ask for your outcomes, and Sharon, we're going to be starting with you, but before I do, I just want to make sure that you all have your outcomes prepared and that you can explain them briefly in one sentence. And even in just adding that little addition on, I've given Sharon enough time to consider her answer. And I would also add, before going back to Sharon, and after Sharon, we'll go to Linda, and then Michelle, and Orna, and John, and I'm just thinking of some of the names I've seen, and then we'll go, okay, Sharon, kick us off. So already Linda and John and Orna already know that they're on deck. So they already are preparing their answers. They're not going to be put on the spot. Sharon has had 15 or 20 seconds to think about this, and and will respond much better.
Great idea.
I will just say that if some teachers have already told me that no matter what they try, these classroom debriefs are stilted, they don't flow like we're used to, and they're still not able to, they feel that they're just not working. So my recommendation would be, again, explain to students, they get it, work with them, and give it a little more time. Do it once or twice more and see if it gets better. Another way is to consider using alternatives to this method of simulation debrief that we've all been using for many, many years, for a couple of generations of conflict and negotiation study. You can have students hold discussions on their own. You can task an observer to lead these discussions, so they're handling them in very small groups in their discussion forum, so it can be much more free-flowing. You can assign them to write reflection papers in addition to or even instead of an intensive debrief, in a personalized debrief in which different people speak. You can make your own points and they can provide their own insight in writing. You can also assign them to debrief the discussion forum, to debrief the simulation in an asynchronous discussion forum that you can set up for it in your LMS. I know some of you have already played around with this in previous courses or now. It is different than the ebb and flow of our classroom simulations, but it works. We're not making a pitch for this type of education now, but if your typical classroom methods, you find that they don't transition well, and you've tried and you've adapted and they still don't transition well, don't fight it too much. Look around and find another method that does. And now I'm just gonna run. Sharon, do you want to start? Because I'm afraid that if I get on this, I'll get on a soapbox and won't get off.
So, what right now is the Band-Aid. I think we all recognize that. We all have been faced in a extremely short amount of time and with a great amount of stress to make a switch to taking what we had designed as an in-person class and putting it online. And that's why we wanted to be very clear that this is really not distance education. Distance education is much more planful, where you have designed your lessons in advance, and if you're having people doing simulations, they likely are not doing them all at the same time, that there are ways that they are going to be working in asynchronous methods, and then also being particularly coming up with some of those ideas that we had in terms of the debriefing that create other ways of having students learn from those simulations that is different than what you would do when everybody's together in the classroom. And again, my experience is that oftentimes those can be even far superior to what happens in a classroom.
But I'll jump in. That is not the reason that we're about to make some suggestion for asynchronous activities or for trying out asynchronous activities once you've kind of gotten the hang of these video conferencing simulations that we've done. But rather, consider we made this jump online very, very quickly as a result of administrators kind of saying this is the quickest and easiest way to transition. And Sharon and I are concerned, deeply concerned, but we're not going to get that deeply into the concerns, that this notion that our classrooms can continue to run synchronously by video in real time for the remainder of the semester or perhaps even longer, those assumptions, it's based on assumptions that students and teachers are going to continue that they will be available, that they'll have capacity to focus during original class time, that they'll have access to devices, that they'll have access to good quality internet during the original class time, and they are not taking into account that reality might change, or that this might not have been a good idea in the first place. What happens, you know, when students go home and all of a sudden they're in a house with their parents and their siblings, and their younger siblings are all homeschooling, so they're also on the internet. Maybe there aren't enough devices to go around. They're also doing real-time synchronous homeschooling, as many schools are. Maybe their internet, which is good on a day-to-day basis, just can't take the bandwidth, doesn't have the bandwidth for 4 simultaneous video conferences. What happens if your laptop breaks and the laptop repair shop isn't open because it's been closed because of the coronavirus, which we've been able to go, this far without really mentioning it. But once we've mentioned it, what happens when, your students have a loved one get sick and they need to dedicate time and attention to supporting them? What if they have to move into a hospital or into their house with them? And suddenly they don't have the availability, or they don't have the internet that they had prepared ahead of time to the extent they prepared. What happens when our students get sick? Are they going to be able to attend synchronous classes and to focus on our thing? Do we really think they're going to be able to perform synchronous simulations? So I'm concerned, and Sharon's concerned, we've talked about this at length, that at some point this whole experiment in taking higher education to synchronous video-based synchronous real-time learning is going to crash and burn. And when it does, we suspect that institutions are going to be relatively slow ships to turn, because they made this decision, and maybe some of them have actually invested anything in this decision. Mainly what they're investing is your time and your anxiety. But they've invested, so it will be a while before they turn around and recognize that, hey, maybe we need to look at other ways of learning. We need to look at asynchronous, that things that people can do at night when they're not, when the house is asleep. People need to do things that they can do at night when they're not working that second job they had to take in order to support themselves after coronavirus-related financial suffering, and so on and so on. So we see that coming. And we suggest that you get started with experimenting on these less synchronous simulations sooner rather than later, before the crash and not after the crash. Okay, so next we're just going to very briefly, and Sharon, you can kick us off, mainly so I don't expound at length, and really different types of asynchronous simulation exercises that, here's the thing, you can practice with them synchronously in class if you like. In other words, you can do that in that same middle hour of your video-based class, just as you've been doing with the video conferencing-based simulation that we've discussed thus far. You can just do a different exercise. All students, leave your video conferencing app open. And now we're going to ask you to do something else. So Sharon, you want to throw out some examples?
Yeah, so the first one, probably because it's a video conference, would not work for you to leave it open and to start a new video conference with everybody all together. But others would work in that fashion. But you certainly could, everything that we just explained about how you use Zoom to teach and run a simulation, the students could run those simulations video conference-wise themselves. Again, Zoom has free subscriptions available for students, so it's not even like you would have to ask them to pay for anything. Some schools like mine actually went to a Zoom Pro and everybody has now a Zoom Pro account, so our students would be easily able to set up their own video conference and run a negotiation simulation or a mediation simulation. Email. So again, most of us have realized that there are the way that negotiations happen are rarely face-to-face in reality. And so especially, even in the old reality, never mind the new reality, So in this reality, we're doing our students a favor if we have them engage in a simulation in which they are negotiating over email. There also are systems that are using mediation email for doing that. Same with text messaging. None of those require them to have any particular equipment or anything else, just what they normally are used to. You can create the simulation and give it to them and say that you aren't to talk. And then you can set up how is that different when you have a less rich medium for doing that. Leads to really rich conversation around that. You could, within your learning management system, set up something called a discussion forum in which students are using that to either relate to a simulation or actually to conduct something. And finally, of course, we always have the telephone as a means for our talking about things. Any way that you can think of where people are exchanging information, they can do a simulation on. And I will make a plug for my good friend Noam that if you want to read about how you do any of these things, and if you want examples of simulations on any of those things, Noam has been an absolute machine on putting things out there. And in the resources that we're going to share, I strongly suggest and encourage you, go to his SSRN page and you will see a treasure trove of resources and information on how these work, what they look like, and how they can be beneficial.
I'm going to practice letting people say nice things about me without responding directly, other than to say, Sharon, I want a t-shirt that says trove on it. Nobody's ever used that word. Just some other asynchronous things that you can ask students to do for simulation. One is you can ask them to simulate with external counterparts, in other words, people who are not students in the course. Tell students that they can, they can negotiate face-to-face with a parent or a sibling. They just need to provide you, they are a friend, right? So they get that friend's or parent's email. You send them their role material, and they conduct that on their own time. So they're having a real face-to-face negotiation experience, which some of you are going to miss with all of this online negotiation. They're having it with people in the flesh. You're just expanding your student body beyond the classroom. Then there's what I like student choice special, which is you tell students, dudes, you do this however you want, okay? You want to do this by email, do it by email. You want to do it by video conference, do it however works for you, as long as you take it seriously. You still need to do it for real. And first of all, everybody's telling these students what to do nowadays. And if we could give them just one choice, wouldn't that be nice? And in addition, they will run these things through programs you've never heard of, and it will be very, very instructional for teachers to do this. Another approach is to conduct adventure learning. Adventure learning is when you give students out-of-class assignments in the sense that you send them out into the real world to negotiate or to have other interactions with people, and then to come back to class and report on them. Sharon has written on this. I've written some on this. There are links in the documents to ways you can do it, but essentially it would be like if you might send them to go negotiate with a seller on Craigslist and come back and report according to whatever parameters you give them. But this is a real negotiation, and it's not a simulation. It's actually a real interaction with some outcome. Outcome that has an impact on the student in the real world. Another one is there are some programs out there on the internet. You can look for them, and I provided the link for one in this paper, which is really like a choose your own adventure. You read through a certain amount of text, and then you're faced with a decision point, and you have to choose, do I offer $50,000 for the spaceship, or do I try and buy it for $20,000? And you make your choice, and your counterpart responds. And then you're faced with another. Do I counteroffer? Do I walk away? So there are these kind of simulators online in which students, instead of simulating with another person, they simulate with software. I've included a link to one in this essay, and you're all very, very welcome to use it. And finally, an exercise, instead of asking students to participate in role plays, you might take one session to assign them to design and write role plays. We've done some research showing that students who design role plays, and this is particularly students who have some experience with role plays so they know what a role play is, if they have to write both sides of a role play themselves, they learn a lot about the elements you've been trying to teach them. In fact, they learn even more than they do by conducting a role play on the same topic. And it kind of taps into what Sharon says, by the way. A different kind of student shines at some of these that don't necessarily shine in a classroom, which is in itself another reason to try out these simulations. Sharon, unless you have anything to add.
So I just wanted to note that there were a couple of, Anna asked us to remind everybody that these kinds of things also work for all kinds of different meetings, not just in classrooms. So hopefully all of you are making those connections, and in watching the chat and the Q&A, there are some really wonderful ideas and suggestions that you've been able to share with each other about additional things that you have done to overcome some of these issues or other ways of handling it, including, people can literally raise their hand. I don't know whether now you can see us now that Noam's not sharing anymore, but, someone can literally raise their hand even in a virtual classroom if you're going to see it.
There's also, I'll just add on, there's also another panel of interactions, so you can ask students to smile or to wave. There are different, I don't remember exactly what Zooms, but if you want to know, so folks, tell me how you're feeling, thumbs up or thumbs down. Do we need a break now, thumbs up or thumbs down? And students will click, so there's another channel.
Yeah, so it's like a polling function. So, play around with this stuff. I think you will find that there are lots of ways, and maybe when everybody is less stressed, it will feel actually fun to be playing around with some of these options that we have.
Yeah. So, folks, we are here and ready to answer any questions, and now we both have our eyes on the chat. So let me ask you, of course, anybody who wants to leave now, please, go ahead and leave. But if anybody wants to stay and answer questions, type your questions into the chat now, and we'll handle them one by one. And
yeah, so I'm reading the chats as they've come in, and there's lots of questions about some of the resources. How do you find online choose your own conflict adventure? So Noam. Okay,
so let me answer that.
About the piece. And
right now, if you look at the chat now, you'll see that I am. Okay, thanks, Gina. You'll notice I've put 3 links in there. Sorry, here's the third. The first is to a very general introduction to transitioning classroom teaching online that I wrote last week. Another one is a session that Mitchell-Hamline, Sharon School, put on very basic introduction to teaching classroom replicas online with Zoom that a lot of people have viewed and found helpful. And finally, there's this new piece that Sharon and I completed just today, which is Pandemic Pedagogy 2, which is basically about the content we've discussed in this session. It summarizes it, and it also provides links to all of these exercises, including that choose your own adventure.
Reiterate and maybe reduce some panic and anxiety if possible. We will be posting a recording of this program to the section of dispute resolution website, and we'll post any and all materials and links that Sharon and Noam provide to us. So we'll make that as easy as possible for everyone to get to it.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks, Gina.
Okay, shall we continue?
Okay, so in conducting a fishbowl, is there a way to change the video setting to highlight those participating in the simulation as opposed to the gallery view?
There is a setting in the gallery view. In the gallery view, there's a setting that shows the speaker. I mean, it kind of highlights the speaker in green or in yellow. I think that's as close as it gets. If you do it in speaker view, it'll go back and forth between those two speakers, let's say, in a negotiation fishbowl. You might play around with either one of them to see which seems to be a better way to watch it. No, there's no way to designate, as far as I know, if anybody knows the answer, there's no way to designate someone as always on.
I think you can pin somebody.
If someone knows how to do that?
Multiple people.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea, Crystal. So what you can do is you can put the fishbowl participants on, have their video on, and you click a setting called Hide Non-Video Participants, and then the others will disappear and their view will be less crowded, and then you'll probably see only those two. And if you're doing a fishbowl in which you circle people in, like, okay, so now you've been mediating the past 10 minutes, and now I want to tap someone else behind the screen, so I send them a message saying, Kate, you're about to jump in. And you instruct students, as Kate jumps in, she should open her video, and as Michael ducks out, he should turn his video off. Let's see, Sharon, what's the next question? Oh, okay, Cookie. So can two professors be hosts in Zoom? I guess so. Yes, yeah. You can designate people as co-hosts. In the session we're doing this here, it's a little different because, Linda, I'm guessing that this is a webinar platform of Zoom and not precisely the video conferencing platform. But yes, someone opens the room and designates the other as co-host. And then you and Michael can both control your classes together.
How do you get the fake backgrounds to work? When I tried, it turns me into a strange look. So I was told, and because I haven't done a lot of playing around with the backgrounds, but I was told is that you really need to have a flat surface behind you, a flat blank surface behind you for it to work well. So if you are trying to do it and you've got like a bookcase behind you, it doesn't really work well because so that's my suggestion there. And for those who don't know about that, there are, you can look like you're on the moon, or you can look like you're in San Francisco.
The reason to do this is not only because it's cool and fun, but it's also because, you know, my room isn't always the neatest. Sharon's is.
No, it's not.
Not only that, I might be in a coffee shop, which I usually don't Zoom from a coffee shop. But again, think of the situation we and our students are in, folks. This is going to get messy real quick. So we might be teaching from home, and our kids are homeschooling in the background. And maybe we don't have a home office. Maybe we don't have a door we can shut. So one way you can avoid having people see what's going on behind you is to use this kind of virtual background that that the Zoom will put up behind you. So you can play around with that. And if it works, it might save you some angst, for instance, of cleaning up and kicking the kids outside before every class session. Let's see, other questions?
The recording will not include the chat, but Gina will provide all of the links.
I think the chat will show up as a text that will go along with it.
Oh, okay.
When Zoom sends me all of the links, they'll send me a link to the video, the audio, and the chat. But the chat's going to be text-based, so you'll have to read through it.
And that depends on your settings, folks. That's just an example of things that you can set. You can set it to record. If you're recording a session, you can set it to record, to capture chat. Something sneaky that I would strongly advise against, you can set it to even capture private chat. Don't do that, folks. It's bad enough that our institutions might be doing that to us, you know. And by that I mean there are privacy issues enough with this whole online transition that folks, that I think our institutions haven't taken into account enough in this jump. And some of that is because of they didn't necessarily, they didn't consider them, or they're not fluent with the technology. But it's bad enough as it is, so we don't need to add to that. Cheryl, you asked if I'm standing up. Yes, the answer is yes, I'm standing up. I prefer to teach standing up when I'm teaching a webinar or a Zoom call. I prefer to stand up in general. If I'm not standing up, I'm sitting at my I'm at my standing desk, which is also an exercise cycle. Which, folks, if you're going to be stuck at home working from your cramped little desk for the next few months, think about your workspace.
Yes, so we had a question on what are the top 2 to 3 things that students have complained about in Zoom instruction. Do you want to take that? No, because I'm trying to think of what complaints I've heard.
Folks, students and anybody using it mainly says Zoom is perfect. Okay? It mainly says Zoom is the video conferencing we've been waiting for. Video conferencing has been available for about 100 years now, and it's only become ubiquitous since about 2010. And it took us all a while to start using it, and to start using it for business. And just about everybody who's starting to use it for professional activity, most mediators who are starting to use video conferencing for online mediation have chosen Zoom. And there's a reason for this. It really, again, I don't get commission. I'm just reporting many, many conversations. It works. It rarely drops. It rarely freezes, and it has a lot of, a lot of smooth functionality. It's also fairly simple. There aren't a zillion controls. So I honestly, I can't remember any recurring complaints. There's nothing wrong, so to speak, with Zoom. Usually, it depends on students' internet connection, which I think is something not to be taken for granted nowadays, right. Or students' devices. To the extent that we could take student devices for granted at all, I think there's an economic equity issue, assumption there that's problematic. Of course, video conferencing will you need devices for it, and the newer your devices are, the better video conferencing will run on them. I ran Zoom just now, and on several devices at once, and one of them was my my Samsung Galaxy 9, and the other was my old Samsung Galaxy 5. It worked much more clunkily and slowly on my Samsung Galaxy 5. I think this is the type of problem that we're going to start encountering as this period goes along.
Yeah, so the question about what happens if your home internet drops and you're hosting a Zoom meeting.
Tell her. She wants to know. Cheryl, she knows how to take it like it is, right? Cheryl, you're screwed. That's the bottom line.
Right. It will drop. It will drop.
Everyone will be kicked out.
And that is important to know. If you are the host of a meeting and you end the meeting for everyone, and that's actually a good thing to just say that we have a note from Gina that Linda and Gina are going to pull them on us in 15 minutes. Linda was very kind. Figure out an alternative way. She listened to Noam and figured out another way if you wanted people to do something and not hear what you're talking about and not kick us off the platform. So thanks for letting us continue on. But we do have a hard stop at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
3 o'clock my time.
Right. We have people here from Australia, New Zealand, Israel that I've seen so far, Holland, and other places. So first of all, welcome. Second of all, this is a good reason to, in your settings in Zoom, you can give yourself the capacity to appoint someone else as a co-host. And you can also, there's a setting in which you can allow that co-host to continue running a meeting even after you've left. And that is the solution to the problem Cheryl raised. What happens if your internet drops? So if you've assigned someone else as co-host and allowed the session to continue in your absence, so if you've given that permission to a TA or to a student, the kind of student that you don't think is going to mess around with the controls behind the scenes, then that's a good solution. Another solution that I strongly urge anybody teaching on Zoom to do is to have another instance of Zoom running in the background. So when I entered the Zoom platform today, I entered through my laptop, which I'm speaking on now, and I also opened my email and clicked the link from the email in my cell phone. So that's why if you see the list of presenters now, you'll see that there's Noam Ebner, but there's also a non-video Noam Ebner, and that non-video Noam Ebner is this other application of Zoom I'm running in the background. Here, I'll turn on the video now, and you can see it come to life. Now you're seeing me watching me. This is scary, but if you have this, then if you drop out of Zoom and you're running this from your own account, then the video will not drop so long as either of these connections is solid. Now I'll also note that my laptop is working on my Wi-Fi internet, my home internet, so to speak. I take my cell phone off of the Wi-Fi and I leave it on my cellular internet. So it would take two systems to drop down or to bottleneck in order for this to drop when I'm teaching. Sometimes I forget, but make it one of those habits.
And one just reminder, if you've got two devices running, is make sure that the second one is on mute, or else you get a feedback loop going.
They'll learn that. You learn that very quickly.
Okay, and Anna has asked us to remind everybody that the ABA section of dispute resolution is going to keep producing more educational programs to help the community deal with the situation. So you're encouraged, if you can, to join the section, to pay attention to the future seminars that are coming up. I know there's one tomorrow, I think, that you all should have heard about, and
online dispute resolution.
That students' membership is free. Law student membership is free, so can let people know that as well.
Cheryl, just one quick response to that next step point of your question. Yes, if you haven't set up a second instance and your internet drops and everybody falls out, so a good norm to set with your students is that if the video suddenly drops, and it drops for everyone, what they do is they use the original link you had provided them to rejoin the group. So if it's just them who dropped out, they'll be able to rejoin. And if it's you who dropped out and dropped everyone out along with you, you will set that up again, and they will eventually be able to enter. Tell them to keep trying. If they try after a few seconds and they're not able to, it might be that your computer crashed and you have to restart it. It might be that you need to go open another device and work on it. So, you can have some classroom rule or norm about, maybe you try again in 5 minutes, but that's something to set with students ahead of time. Okay, we have 9 minutes left for questions. Let's see what we have.
Yep, I'm monitoring. So far there's nothing. Let me see here. Oh, okay. Do you ever use a camera if you teach standing up and wire that to the computer? Do you ever use a camera if you teach standing up? I do teach standing up, and I have, so it's not an issue for me. Of course, I'm very short, so I can set it up such that it's not a problem. My students are used to seeing me in a stand-up mode.
Right, which is one way, not right as in you're short, because I think you're just gaslighting us here and taking advantage of the video. But that's, you can, you want to find a good angle to work at. Like, this is not a good angle, and that's the angle that you'll have if you put it down on your desk and stand over it. But you can put your laptop on a shelf. I have an adjustable height desk that I yank up to this height. And something I discovered is that if you need to raise your laptop above desk height, then a really, really good way to do it is to take out your copy of the Negotiator's Desk Reference, both volumes of it, which I hope you have at home. And when you put these together, they're quite a formidable weapon. Chris and Andrea would be the first to say it, but they're also a platform that gives you this much height, and they are very, very stable. So more uses to that book than you might have expected.
Okay, so here's a question about what do we recommend in terms of time and breaks? What's the ideal class length for a simulation class? And, you know, and I think it's a question we obviously face when we are all together, as well as when we are doing any kind of synchronous activity. And so I think you're right to sometimes when we're doing it in this fashion, we forget that to build breaks in for people. So I think it is important to recognize that, you know, if you have a class that's scheduled for 2 or 3 hours and the students are used to taking a break during that time, you should give them a break during that time. That you're all together, because people will have needs that they need to take care of. So, you know, I don't know that, you know, in terms of the ideal pedagogy for doing online stuff, smaller chunks generally are better, but we are not talking about that. We're talking about moving our synchronous class into a synchronous online environment, and so just to pay attention to what are the needs.
Right, and I'll add on that, you know, if you are running any sort of a classroom outside of the simulation section in which you expect students to be as attentive as they are in class, and you might cold call on them as some teachers are still doing for original Socratic purposes or to keep them awake. So students might, you know, they'll be sitting like this, you know, very attentive and looking at a screen for hours on end. And, you know, and they're even more tensed up than they are in a classroom setting. So I suggest giving breaks more often than you do in a classroom. Keep in mind that when you assign students to start a simulation in your classroom, very often, sometimes students will run to the bathroom, even though it's not a formal break. They'll run to the bathroom beforehand. They'll run to the bathroom on their way home, on their way back to class, on their way back to class. And this doesn't have those opportunities. Build in those opportunities in class. Give breaks in space. Give breaks out of space in which you say, folks, we're going to come back in 10 minutes. And, you know, shake up your classrooms. Be that teacher who says, okay, everybody, I want to see everybody get up and stretch. I'm going to put on some music now, and I want to see your best dance moves. Be that person. Because so many of their other teachers now are not going to be that person. So, A, that's going to make their learning very stressful and strainful on the body. And B, you know, why not mix it up? You mix up things in your classroom. Bring that online as well.
Yeah, so great advice. During breaks, do people stay on Zoom? I think it's probably best if you're giving, you know, a five-minute break, just to keep everybody on the platform. They can turn off their cameras if they want, certainly mute, but don't have them coming in and out. I think it just adds strain to the...
In fact, remind them to mute and kill their video. You have to, something to take into consideration in general, not only about simulations, not only about what I'm about to say, but in general, is one thing that I think we're not taking into account enough in this transition online, is that many students will be accessing their classrooms on mobile devices as opposed to laptops. And that's not the picture that many teachers have in mind when they picture this classroom. We picture students sitting at computers. Lots of students will join on mobile devices, whether because they need to, whether that's the only device they have, whether they're out and about, or that's just their preferred method. So that informs the type of assignments we should, you know, how we give them assignments. It also informs the instructions we give them before sending them out to a potential bathroom break. Enough said.
So I'm thinking that we probably need to shut this down to give the ABA the time to school and get into their next session on it. So I want to thank everybody for their participation, and thanks, Noam. It was fun.
Thank you, Sharon. Everybody listen, we suggest download this written essay, and you'll see that it touches on all these issues. It answers some of the questions, some more of the questions that we haven't reached in the chat. And you can continue. You have my email, you have Sharon's email. We're not hiding anywhere. Maybe there'll be some follow-up sessions. There definitely will be other sessions on online stuff in this period, as Linda and Gina and the ABA are generously doing. There might be specifically on this type of teaching, or perhaps even on simulations. We'll see how that goes. Feel free to write us.
And we will make sure. There's a question of do we have your email? Yes, you will have our email. I promise. We will make sure that Gina gets our email included in whatever goes out with the link.
I'm typing mine into the panel right now.
Oh, is that in the text panel?
But it will also, Gina and Linda will ask you to put them up on whatever page this is.
Well, we'll be sure to include it, we promise.
Folks, it's time to shut this down because our room is shut. We promised the longest Q&A in history, and we still have the stamina to go on.
And thank you both for sharing an enormous amount of time and your knowledge and experience. This has been a great platform.
Absolutely. Thank you so much,
here,
guys.
as part of the chat, has been learning from each other as they've been learning from you. So it's been great.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it so much.
Everybody hang in there.
Absolutely.
Take care, everyone out there.